So many cars claim to be unique, but the Range Rover really is, continuing to set the standard in the super luxury SUV sector. Larger, lighter, more economical, smarter looking, and even better off-road, the aluminium-bodied 4th generation version is finally good enough to properly combine the imperious qualities of a top luxury saloon with off-piste abilities that would be limited only by the skills of its driver. A Rolls Royce in the rough, there's nothing quite like it.
Sometimes being the best just isn't good enough. Take the Range Rover. With a pedigree going back through 4 distinct generations all the way back to 1970, it's always been the finest 4x4 by far. Yet the challenges still remain. How to continue to be the world's leading luxury SUV at the same time as appearing credibly eco-centric? How to make further forays into the market for super luxury saloons that don't have to be able to cross the Congo or see you through Siberia? And how to reach out to buyers from both segments who would never previously have considered owning a Range Rover. This Mark IV model must do all of these things and much more. An extreme challenge certainly, but then this car is well used to those. I've driven them all over the world, from Icelandic glaciers to the Colorado Rockies, from the Australian wilderness to downtown in Beverly Hills. But even I was wondering how the brand would meet the fresh, testing and very different demands of the modern era. After all, the old Mark III model had a difficult life, originally designed by BMW, then expensively re-engineered by Ford when the company Land Rover was sold to the Blue Oval. A rise in post-millennium SUV sales ensured that Mark III model's position as the best-selling Range Rover in history, but interest in it had long since faded by the time this 4th generation version was launched at the end of 2012. Like the 70s original, it was clearly revolutionary, and for very much the same reasons. A lightweight aluminium body structure set Spencer King's very first Range Rover apart nearly half a century ago. And here, the SUV market's first adoption of pretty much the same thing gives this car a credible shot at all its stated goals. The lighter weight means it can be larger, faster and more responsive, at the same time as being more efficient, cheaper to run and better equipped. It can claim a lighter eco-footprint, a properly limousine-like rear cabin, and performance to rival that of a super saloon. And yes, it'll be even better if you're setting off across the Serengeti or exploring the Amazon. It'll be more than ever one of a kind. Let's try it. The silence is truly impressive, making this a superb long-distance cruiser. Under the bonnet, very little has changed in the conventional engine lineup. Why would it have? The freshly developed aluminium underpinnings create a weight saving roughly equivalent to a full complement of passengers, which means that this car can go faster and be more efficient without any need for oily tweaking. It also means that this car is now light enough to accommodate something less than a hulking great V8, and it's some time since we've been able to say that about a Range Rover. In this case, the TD V6 6-cylinder unit borrowed from the Range Rover Sport, in this case developing 258 brake horsepower and 600 newton meters of torque, enough to fire you from rest to 60 in just 7.4 seconds, on the way to 130 miles an hour to the accompaniment of a growling but rather appealing engine note. It's all quite satisfying, until of course you try something better. In this case, the 4.4 litre SD V8 diesel that I'm driving here. With 339 brake horsepower and 700 newton meters of torque, it's one of the most powerful diesels in modern production, and it's able to get you from rest to 60 in just 6.5 seconds, and on the way to 135 miles an hour flat out, should your private drive be long enough to accommodate it. Now, those in such a fortunate position will also be able to shoulder the high running costs of the minority interest petrol Range Rover model, the 5-litre supercharged 510 brake horsepower V8 version, able to get from rest to 60 in just 5.1 seconds, before ultimately being artificially restrained at 140 miles an hour. That only leaves the diesel-electric version that you can talk to your dealership about, the hybrid model with 333 brake horsepower. It is able to put out less than 170 grams per kilometre of CO2, yet still sprint to 60 in not much more than 7 seconds. Speed, of course, is one thing. Control is another. Previous Range Rovers have conquered the toughest terrain known on this planet, but have never fully mastered the rather difficult art of making something that weighs as much as 2 family cars handle on tarmac in a way that could really be described as enjoyable. Is this one different? Yeah, you could say that. I'm not going to pretend that it fully rivals the class-leading Porsche Cayenne in this respect, but it gets pretty close for something that has much greater reserves of all-round capability. At least this SD V8 version is. Unlike the entry-level TD V6, it comes as standard with the dynamic response active lean control system that I reckon is pretty central to the kind of driving experience that this car can offer. With this in place, cornering speeds that would either have confounded the Mark III model or had its occupants reaching for the nearest sick bag are completed without passenger comment. Combine this with the great view out you get from the commanding driving position and you'll be amazed at just how easy it is to thread this 5-metre long and 2-metre wide luxury conveyance down a narrow British country lane. Some cars in this class feel really too big and unwieldy for this kind of route, but this one doesn't. Which means that when you're not driving in your wellies and instead you're in the mood and want to click the little rotary controller for the gearbox from D to S and play about with the steering wheel mounted paddles, this car can be a surprisingly satisfying secondary road companion. The air suspension helps, particularly on off-camber roads that dip and crest, showing off the generous maximum wheel travel. And this car's other standout feature, the adaptive dynamics system. Now this offers continuously variable damping, able to program the dampers basically infinitely between extreme settings from soft to hard, depending on the kind of road that you're on. It can even sense when you're traveling off-road and program the system accordingly. Ah yes, off-road conditions. I was getting to those. The Range Rover has long been the master when it comes to getting its occupants across their chosen terrain in consummate assurance and comfort. As before, there's a full-time intelligent 4-wheel drive system with a 2-speed transfer box that you can shift down into at speeds of up to 37 miles an hour, giving you a low-range option for really bad off-road conditions or for when you're towing. But the most impressive part of the whole 4-wheel drive setup for me continues to be Land Rover's terrain response system that you access via the knobs and buttons below the rotary gear knob. Using this, you simply select the setting for the kind of terrain you're covering. Sand, perhaps, for those days on the beach, or rock crawl for the unlikely event that you find yourself having to negotiate boulder-strewn riverbeds. Then there's grass, gravel, snow, which should be helpful next time you have to visit your folks in the country during a frosty snap, and mud and ruts, which should get you across your local ploughed field. All of that is as before. What's new for this 4th generation Range Rover though is an auto setting in the middle of all of those options with this button here, and that basically does it all for you. It even advises you if you need to shift into low range or raise the air suspension to its highest off-road setting. So all you really need to do most of the time is select auto, crank up the stereo, and then glide across terrain that you wouldn't even walk across. It's brilliant. Terrain you can tackle with a bit more confidence than before, thanks to a 17mm increase in the ride height. It's now 303mm. And a 900mm wading depth. That's 200mm more than the previous generation version of this car offered, thanks to an innovative air intake system. You'll need to set the air suspension system at its highest level to achieve these figures, of course, at which point it can vary its height a little up or down to suit long, rutted roads. In that off-road suspension setting, there's an approach angle of 34.7 degrees, a departure angle of 29.6 degrees, and a ramp breakover angle of 28.3 degrees. Otherwise, things are pretty much as before for those prepared to subject such an expensive vehicle to life beyond the paved highway. So there's hill start assist to stop you from lurching backwards on steep slopes as your foot goes from brake to throttle. And once you get to the top of the slope and you're going down the other side, there's gradient acceleration control to help you maintain a dignified and safe progress down a very steep slope, even if you do forget to select the hill descent control system. There's also a gradient release control function for that hill descent control system to very carefully lower your Range Rover over precipitous drops in a way that your passengers will appreciate. No other vehicle takes this much pride in going places where it probably shouldn't. This is every inch a Range Rover. You know it even without a glance at the elegant badgework, which is as it should be. Jerry McGovern's design team committed early on to protect the visual characteristics that make this car what it is. The wraparound clamshell bonnet, the deep glass area, the low waistline with the straight feature line along the side with no wedge or step up inside styling, the close wheel arch cuts, and of course the iconic two-piece rear tailgate. But if much about this car is familiar, much too about this smoother, more contemporary fourth generation design is very different, as it must be to win over a completely new generation of customers. There's a deep, imposing front grille and a more rakish slant to the front A-pillars that, like the B and the C pillars further back, have a premium gloss black finish. It's there to emphasise the so-called floating roof and sits above near flush side glazing. Another neat touch are the side vents on the front doors, while at the rear I really like the high-mounted LED stoplight that's under the rear spoiler. It works on a hidden until lit basis and illuminates the full width of the tailgate. More important though is what lies beneath this slippery shape, essentially a £1 billion investment in aluminium technology. This being the world's first SUV to boast a lightweight all aluminium monocoque body structure. Now, it's a body structure that sees this car, well, up to 420 kilograms lighter than its steel-bodied direct predecessor. That's equivalent to the weight of a full complement of passengers. And that's despite the fact that this car isn't really much bigger than the previous generation model. Slightly longer and slightly wider for one reason, and one reason only, to offer more space here in the back. Without that, Land Rover knew it could never credibly pretend this car to be as much luxury saloon as luxury SUV. And sure enough, an extra 42mm in the wheelbase has made all the difference. Wider door apertures and a lower access setting on the air suspension make it easier to get in. And once you are in, it's easier to get comfortable with over a metre of leg stretching room and a reclining option on the seats for greater comfort on longer journeys. Now, standard models have space for 3 across the back seat here, but in this case I've got the extra cost executive class 2-seat option, which sees the fortunate occupants separated by a veneered centre console and enjoying extra seat adjustment and even seat massaging facilities. This car's larger size still isn't enough to permit the fitment of the couple of extra boot-mounted rear seats you'll find on a Land Rover Discovery, and indeed on what are arguably, in concept anyway, this car's closest to competitors, Toyota's Land Cruiser V8 and the Mercedes GL class. Still, Range Rover buyers have never seemed to want 7 seats. Of much greater importance to them has been luggage space, so I should point out that in this 4th generation version there's about 10% less of it. The figure is 909 litres now. But you still get this glorious two-piece folding tailgate, so you can sit and watch Annabelle at her horse trials in comfort. And if you do need more cargo room and you specified the standard 3-person rear bench, you can fold that forward to release up to 2,030 litres. But of course, what really matters is how it feels behind the wheel. And once seated there, you'll find the instruments in the usual place, but not instruments in the way that you might be used to. Now, as with final versions of the 3rd generation Range Rover, the normal speedo and rev counter clocks are replaced by digital facsimiles projected onto a 12.3-inch colour TFT screen. Driving normally, you'd have to look twice to see that anything was amiss, but when you switch to off-road mode, then the rev counter display moves aside in favour of a graphical layout which shows you which wheels are being driven, which diffs are being locked, and much more. This customisable display can be configured to show anything from outside temperature to navigation information, telephone settings to wheel articulation. Seated up front amongst the beautiful leathers, polished metals and handcrafted veneers, you find yourself in a cabin that's as classy and cosseting as you'd want, with simple, elegant controls and a notable absence of button clutter. Most of the main features having been relocated to an 8-inch colour touchscreen that dominates the centre of the dash, and via which, by voice, touch or steering wheel button, marshals everything from sat-nav controls to seat heating, from stereo information to surround cameras. Now, for this screen, Land Rover engineers have developed clever dual view technology, enabling front seat passenger and driver to simultaneously view different images on the screen. So that, for example, you can be viewing sat-nav information as you drive, while your passenger is viewing a DVD video. Very clever. List pricing suggests that you'll be paying somewhere in the £70,000 to £80,000 bracket for a diesel Range Rover, and in the region of £100,000 for the 5-litre V8 supercharged petrol model. Now, that's around 40% more than you'd pay for the less exalted Range Rover Sport. But that car really appeals to a rather different audience. Most potential Range Rover buyers won't even be considering the smaller model, but will instead be deliberating between the 2 diesels supplied with this one and deciding whether or not to find an extra £7,000 to go from the entry-level TD 3-litre V6 diesel to the 4.4-litre SD V8 diesel that I have here. Now, as ever, there's a single 5-door, 5-seat body style, but this time around there are 3 main trim levels. There's a premium of around £6,500 to progress from entry-level Vogue to the Vogue SE spec that I have here. Now, it's hard to imagine why you'd want any more than is supplied with Vogue SE, but if you do, then you can spend a further £10,000 on the model of your choice and progress to the sumptuous realms of the autobiography spec. And rivals? Well, it's easy for Land Rover and loyal owners to say that there aren't any, but in many ways they're right. Yes, it's true to say that most of the luxury SUVs that come to mind, Porsche's Cayenne, BMW's X5 and X6, the Mercedes M-Class, the Audi Q7, all retail for around 30% less. But then they would do, because they're aimed at a lower section of the luxury SUV market, for which Land Rover has provided the Range Rover Sport. The only 2 luxury SUVs that are more in keeping with this Range Rover's money no object approach, Toyota's Land Cruiser V8 and the Mercedes GL class, are really rather different, offering 7 seats for a start, practicality that the average Range Rover owner simply doesn't need. For all those reasons, if I were to be one of those people, I'd very quickly conclude then that this is the best 4x4 by far. But is it also, as Land Rover claims, up with maybe even better than the finest luxury saloons you can buy? Well, you could certainly argue that. Okay, it's true that a Range Rover isn't quite as sharp to drive and as magic carpet-like as the kind of Mercedes S-Class or Jaguar XJ that would cost you around 15% less. But on the plus side, you've got that commanding roadway presence, more commanding than any luxury saloon. You've got that brilliant commanding driving position too, in a cabin that's just as lavishly appointed. You've got a more powerful diesel engine than any mainstream luxury saloon can offer, and ultimate 4x4 ability should you ever need it. That's an awful lot of pluses. If, having considered all this, you conclude that nothing less than a Range Rover will do, then whichever engine you choose, 3-litre TD V6, 4.4-litre SD V8, or even the 5-litre V8 supercharged petrol, then you'll have a right to expect a very high specification indeed as standard. And by and large, you won't be disappointed. Though it's a pity that you have to pay extra for a full-size spare wheel, just about everything else you'd expect is fitted as standard, and maybe quite a bit more. All Range Rovers come with alloy wheels of at least 20 inches in size, adaptive xenon headlamps, auto wipers, power folding mirrors, keyless entry, rear privacy glass, front and rear parking sensors with a rear parking camera, a powered upper and lower tailgate, heated leather seats front and rear that are electrically powered up front, a heated leather steering wheel, cruise control, a center console cooler, 3-zone climate control, interior mood lighting, a hard disk satellite navigation system, Bluetooth compatibility for your mobile phone, voice activation for a 8-inch color infotainment touchscreen, and a state-of-the-art 380-watt Meridian sound system. That's just the start, of course, and it's very easy to add 20 or 30% to the asking price with just a few very well chosen extras. The sublime executive class rear seating pack, for example, the full length glass panoramic roof, the 29 speaker 1700 watt Meridian 3D sound system, the surround camera system, the park assist setup that'll steer you into the tightest spaces, the load space rails, the electrically deployable side steps, the electrically operable tow bar, and the park heat system that'll make sure that the car's toasty warm every time you get into it in the morning. All would be very nice to have. Safety provision, though, is more than just a nice to have. So it's just as well that there's plenty of it here. Beyond the expected twin front, side and curtain airbags, Isofix child seat fastenings and pedestrian-friendly bonnet. So stand by for the acronyms: DSC, Dynamic Stability Control, RSC, Roll Stability Control, ETC, Electronic Traction Control, CBC, Corner Brake Control, and for the anti-lock brakes, you've got an EBA, Emergency Brake Assist function, to help in sudden stops that will be advertised to following motorists by automatically flashing EBL emergency brake lights. There's even a trailer stability assist system that automatically corrects trailer sway by braking the opposite wheel. And that's before you get off-road and use hill start assist to get you up steep slopes. You can then get down again using hill descent control and gradient release control. Now that little list is familiar from before, but new to this 4th generation Range Rover is an extra safety package I'd think very carefully about including. It's based around an ACC adaptive cruise control system that not only automatically keeps you a safe distance from the car in front on the motorway, but even includes a queue assist feature to extend the ACC's functionality in slow-moving or busy traffic. There's also an extra feature that uses the ACC's radar system to facilitate intelligent emergency braking, a system that constantly monitors vehicles moving in the same direction as you are, and then reduces impact speed if it thinks an accident situation is inevitable. Other safety options include headlamps that dip themselves at night, a blind spot information system to stop you dangerously pulling out to overtake, and a reverse traffic detection system that warns you of impending collision situations during reverse parking manoeuvres. Celebrity Range Rover owners like the British royal family, Bruce Springsteen, Jack Nicholson, Keira Knightley and Madonna may not worry too much about running costs. but an increasing number of Range Rover owners do. After all, it's a little hard to tell your employees to turn off their screensavers at night when you're driving a hulking great luxury SUV that can't even average 30 miles to the gallon on a good day. Also, EEC directives are becoming increasingly punitive and will be so for Land Rover if they don't make their cars a bit more planet friendly. Hence the huge investment in aluminium technology that has brought us this 4th generation version. The increased efficiency of this car isn't just down to aluminium, mind you. There's the slippery 0.34 CD drag coefficient, lightweight Brembo brake calipers, aerodynamic underfloor panelling, an active grille shutter, electric power steering, and on the TD 3-litre V6 model at least, a start-stop system that cuts the engine when you don't need it, stuck at the traffic lights or waiting in queues. Not that you should get your hopes too high in this regard. This might be the most economical Range Rover lineup ever made, but buying one still won't get you installed on the Greenpeace Christmas card list. After all, if you add a few options to this car, it can easily end up weighing over 2.5 tonnes, which makes the entry-level TD 3-litre V6 diesel's return of 37.7 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 196 grams per kilometre of CO2 all the more impressive. Now, thanks to the lightweight structure, this TD-V6 can return pretty much exactly the same performance figures as the V8 diesel in the old Mark III generation Range Rover lineup, yet return fuel consumption and CO2 figures that are 20% better. If you want to do better than that, then you'll need to talk to your dealer about the V6 diesel electric hybrid model, which can return an impressive 169 grams per kilometre of CO2. Now, the SD V8 diesel that I'm driving here, the more conventional diesel, isn't quite in that league, of course, but nevertheless, its returns are better than you might be expecting for such a powerful engine. 32.5 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 229 grams per kilometre of CO2. Now, that's not quite as good as more powerful diesel rivals like the BMW X5 M50D or the Porsche Cayenne Diesel S, but it's certainly a much more sensible proposition than the variant that sits at the top of the Range Rover lineup, the petrol-powered supercharged 5-litre V8 with 510 brake horsepower. Now, this manages just 20.5 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle, though you'll be doing well if you achieve that, and puts out 322 grams per kilometre of CO2. The biggest running cost issue, of course, when it comes to any expensive luxury car is depreciation. Current industry forecasts over the usual 3-year 36,000 mile period are that the entry-level TD-V6 will retain 64% of its original value over that period, with this SD-V8 managing around 50% of its original value. If you go for the supercharged petrol model, then you'll be looking to achieve 42 to 43% of the original purchase price. Those figures could rise over time as the used car market reappraises this 4th generation Range Rover in the light of the very large steps that it's taken forward. That only leaves insurance groups. They range between 45 and 47 for the TD V6, between 48 and 49 for this SD V8, and at 49 for the 5-litre supercharged petrol V8. That only leaves wider questions of eco-friendliness. Things, in other words, you can use to justify your purchase to any eco-minded, bearded folk that you might meet down the pub. Knowing that half of the aluminium used in this car can be recycled will be useful. So will the fact that this car is bonded and riveted in its body shell rather than welded to reduce energy in production. Well, that's helpful too. Even the leather in the seats is produced using a low-carbon process. And there's the fact that a car as durable and desirable as this Range Rover will be on the road long after more overtly eco-conscious cars have been scrapped. Well, that makes it eco-friendly too. It's all enough to give you a very green-minded glow. From princes to politicians, from rock gods to rock climbers, from footballers to farmers, the Range Rover has always appealed to a more diverse group of customers than any other car, as you'd expect it would. This is, after all, far more than just the world's finest luxury SUV, instead unchallenged as 4 vehicles in one. An everyday luxury saloon, a weekend leisure vehicle, a high-performance, long-distance private jet, and a working cross-country conveyance. Such perfection doesn't come without a price in origin or ownership, or without compromise in poorer handling, for example, against, say, a super saloon, or in tight rear cabin space against, say, a luxury limousine. Perhaps that's why you've never considered one of these. And if so, consider this. Thanks to its revolutionary aluminium underpinnings, this 4th generation version is sharper to drive, ravishing in the rear, and vastly more efficient and affordable to run. It is, in short, a very different proposition. Drive it through a river, drive it to the opera. It's as happy either way. Beautifully built, gorgeously finished, and astonishingly quick. True, it's never going to quite be all things to all people, but it has perhaps moved as close to fulfilling that remit as any modern car is ever likely to get. Makes you proud to be British, doesn't it?